I began, I got a job as a drug counselor, and it turned out that, I had a talent for it. And the reason I think I had a talent for it is the way I sort of made my living in those days was hustling pool and poker. And it turns out that those skills are very applicable to therapy,
Mhm.
uh, because, uh, if you're hustling pool, you're convincing somebody to continue doing something that's clearly not in their interest. And playing poker, basically, you see what people do and bet they'll keep doing it. And I turn, you know, having come from a gangster family, I was sort of steeped in that kind of hustler mentality. And so, uh, the people that I talked to were like 2 or 3 times more likely to go into treatment than people seeing other counselors. And so I got the interest of it and was mentored by some talented people. And got, got a master's degree by writing something that was later published uh, and is still in print. It
Mhm.
was published in '84. And it's still in print, called Families Under the Influence, which is a book about strategic therapy with alcoholic families.
Mhm.
And so, I've been working around addictions since, the early '70s. Uh, and so I wrote this book and became a famous expert, and, started doing workshops, and I was plenary, I did plenaries at a couple of national conferences. And uh, being a big shot sort of didn't bring out the best in me. And it sort of got my arrogant asshole parts
Mhm.
uh, stimulated. Uh, and by in the uh, '80s, the late '80s, I was sick of therapy, and I started doing organizational consulting
Mhm.
uh, because it paid better and it was easier. And I wasn't having any fun doing that. I was successful in that. I had plenty of clients, and but I really didn't enjoy it very much. And just about that time, but in '84, the book was published, and a guy named Richard Simon did ran a magazine called The Family Therapy Networker that's become the Psychotherapy Network. And he ran a conference in DC, and it was sort of by invitation only. If he wanted you to present, he would invite you, and if he didn't, he didn't. It wasn't, a panel. It was just him. And so in '84, I was invited to speak. And I was at the presenters party the night, the night before the conference starts. He throws a party. Actually, the night that the conference is ending, he threw a party for the presenters. And I was talking to somebody, and I heard somebody behind me saying, uh, so this guy raised his hand and said, uh, aren't you afraid if you do therapy that way, the parents will kill the kid? And so I said, yeah, well, that's the whole point of the therapy, to get the parents to kill the kid. And I turned around to see who the smartass was, and it turned out to be Dick Schwartz.
Mm.
And so Dick and I and a couple of other people, whose names you don't need to know, became sort of Rich Simon's inner circle. And what we mostly did is play basketball
Mm.
and hang around and shoot the shit. And Dick wrote a number of articles for the network. I only wrote 2 or 3. And I had read Dick's, but I don't learn well from reading. Mostly reading for me is just recreation. And so my understanding of what he was doing was it was another form of what I was doing, which was strategic hypnosis.
Mm-hmm.
And he was just using this, this dissociative process that I just thought, yeah, that's a hypnotic process. And I didn't have any idea really what he was into. And we continued to be friends and we played ball together until in 95, there was an AFTA conference in Boston. And I was living in Boston or near Boston. And I never, I was a member of AFTA, but I had never attended the conference because it's like presenting for your competition.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't see. AFTA is it's an organization. I think it still exists. I'm not in it anymore. But it's for senior family therapy trainers, basically. And I have joined. I won't go into it. But so I went to the conference and I saw Dick do a demo. And the minute I saw him do a demo, I realized he was onto something far beyond what anybody else was doing, what I was doing. And basically, I started imitating what he was doing, what he did in the demo, and just started doing it. And a few months later, I went out to Michigan and got a training in it, and so I became. This is, I guess, 95, 96. For a while, I was the only IFS therapist east of Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And so Dick, okay, yeah. So then this guy, Ralph Cohen, down in Connecticut, who was he ran the master's program in marriage and family therapy at Central Connecticut State University. He read a thing, and it was about, it had a description of IFS. And he was, wise enough to spot that this was something different. And he invited Dick to come to Connecticut to do a training. And Dick called me and asked if I'd help him do the training. And so, and there were, two others. There's a guy named Greg Johansson, who was a Hakomi trainer, and a woman named Mitchie Rose, who was one of his sort of inner circle in Chicago. And she had a shamanic background and a PhD in biology.
Mm-hmm.
And she's still a friend of mine. And so we started doing these trainings in New York. I mean, in central, in New Britain, Connecticut. And so I PA'd, I think, 8 trainings that he did. That, and then a person who ran the who was the program chairman for an organization called the New England Society for the Treatment of Trauma and Dissociation, NESTTD. And it's a very ponderous sounding title, but it had basically all the trauma therapists in Boston. And this woman, Mona Barbera, who's still involved with IFS, asked Dick to present to them, and he, they paid $200 or something. So Dick didn't do it. He asked if I would do it. I did it. And so I gave, a talk and a demo of IFS to like 100 trauma therapists at McLean Hospital in Belmont, Mass. And that was on a Friday, and the next Monday, my answering machine was stuffed, and there was, just countless calls, people wanting me to be their therapist or treat their husbands, or do whatever. There was an enormous amount of excitement about IFS. And a guy I was sharing an office with who was a major hypnosis teacher in Boston invited Dick to do a conference because there was enormous interest. And Dick came and did a conference in Boston. There was an enormous amount of excitement, and so I was asked to do the first training in Boston, and I did that with Sue McConnell, who was sort of mentored me in training, because I was on the road and basically, I did a lot of public speaking. I did a lot of presenting, but it was basically stand-up. It was entertainment. I wasn't teaching people how to do anything. I was showing people what I did in an amusing way. And I didn't really know how to teach people how to do things very well, even though I had been teaching hypnosis and whatnot. But, looking back, I was not a very good teacher. And she helped me, learn how to teach. And then I did 3 trainings with Tony Irvine Blank, and then I think 10, then 3 with a woman named Chris Mathner, who died of lung cancer after the last one I did. Then I did 10 with Ann Senko and a bunch with Rena Dubin. And after a while, people asked me to do why I didn't do them alone, and I realized because my style is so idiosyncratic that I wanted, people to have somebody else to imitate. Because, when I was learning it, I imitated Dick until, until I developed my own style, until it sort of got into my cells, and I started doing it the way I do it, which included a lot of hypnotic and strategic technology because I had it. So I used it, and I still use it. I think about it very differently. Like when I was teaching hypnosis, I really didn't know what hypnosis was. I just knew how to do it. And, when you start thinking about parts and what you're doing, then I realized what hypnosis really was. But I was thinking about it very differently. IFS is hypnosis. I mean, basically, you're getting people lost in their imagination, and you're, having them essentially create parts in with their mind, and because parts don't know their parts, and but I've been doing therapy for so long that I've acquired, and this is a brag. I consider myself, and I am considered to be expert at, working with serious trauma, working with dissociative processes. I've gotten very interested in, physical manifestations and psychosomatics. This woman who was my co-trainer had a fear of heights, had a phobia to heights. So I did my thing with her, and then she was watching a movie where there was a train, like crashing along a cliff, and she realized that before I had done this, she would have run out of the theater, and she was sitting there perfectly calmly. So she started telling people about that. Mm-hmm. And Tony came up to me and said, I can't speak in public, and I want to teach. So I did the thing with her, and, she's become, quite a trainer since then. And so she talked that up. And so I think it was she that asked me to write it up. And when I wrote it up, this elaborate NLP, procedure, but looking at it through IFS eyes, I was able to reduce it to less than a page, a protocol that'll cure phobias. And it'll also cure anxiety attacks. Yeah. And when I do it, it works virtually every time. I'd say 99 point something percent of the time. And when people are using it for the first time, just reading it, they get usually about 75% success. Because, when I'm lazy and I do the same old shit,
Mm-hmm.
usually, until it doesn't work. And then, I have to think of something, and I think of something, and if that doesn't work, I think of something else. And if it does work, I try it again in similar things. And if it keeps working, it becomes a technique. And I have a part that thought that being a good therapist meant having a lot of technique. And so I learned a lot of technique. And it turns out I was wrong, but I've got the technique, so I share it. And if people find it useful or attractive, they use it, and if they don't, they don't. But I have a bunch of protocols, and I have an approach to smoking cessation. I basically, anybody who asks for it, I give it to them, and I tell them if anybody wants it. I don't have a proprietary interest in it. I'm interested in spreading it and empowering as many people as I can with it. And, that's what I'm trying to do. With this is I I have a gift, and I also have been. I have 50 years of experience, over 50 years of experience as a therapist, and so I used to work with the hard shit. I worked for, I think it was 12 years with exclusively people who were, referred by agents of social control. People who didn't want to talk to me and were, I was the lesser of whatever evils they were faced with. That's where I worked with people who were, basically all court remanded, and they, a number of them had what you would, what psychiatry would call serious mental illnesses. And, because people who become addicts mostly, are people who are drowned in shame and have serious trauma backgrounds.
Right.
And, these are the people who, and then, once they, and of course the addiction, becomes cyclical, and it generates more shame and more addiction and whatnot. And so a lot of these people wind up doing very bad things. And in the beginning, when I started doing this, I was faced with the fact that because I had done bad things, and I had been an addict, although I had actually had addictive relationships with a number of things. I projected my guilt on them, and I had nothing but contempt for them. And the problem is, if you're speaking to somebody who is morally judging you, your only recourse is to cancel them. So, of course, I had these incredibly boring, tedious conversations with people where I was judging them and they were fending me off and bullshitting me. And it was intolerable, it's just so boring. And so, and I don't make changes easily or consciously. I'm getting much better at it in my old age, but so thought of just quitting was unattractive, and the only recourse I had was to start getting curious about these guys, and I started opening my heart in self-defense, and then as that happened, these conversations became much more interesting. And I became effective with them again. I had a sort of state of that very early in my career, and now, I was further along.
the relationship, in your view, between hypnosis and IFS. And I think you provided a good answer. You kind of covered that already, and that was something I was curious about. But I have two. The first follow up is you mentioned you gave one of those talks at a conference, and I was on Friday, and then I think the next Monday you got all these calls, to treat people. And, you talk about being one of the few only therapists in the country, the only one east of the Mississippi. And now you see IFS as, nationally and globally recognized as the model it is. Zooming out for a moment, what in your experience has led to IFS being resonant with so many people, both clients and professionals?
Well, the thing is that psychotherapy, in other words, psychiatry, doesn't make sense. And it doesn't make sense because it doesn't work. It's helpless. And what opened psychiatry, what opened basically the field of psychotherapy, it used to be that only physicians could be trained in hypnosis. Milton Erickson, for a long time, would not train anybody who wasn't an MD. And the American Association of Clinical Hypnosis would not admit anybody who was not an MD. And then they grudgingly admitted PhDs. But the problem with psychiatry is if you're not Milton Erickson, who didn't do psychiatry, he did. He did Milton Erickson, and he actually believed that, and stated that hypnosis confused people and allowed, sort of the way I forget the words he used, but it gets their protective system enough confused and paralyzed so that a healing principle that exists in everybody can be liberated. Mm-hmm. So that sounds pretty consistent with IFS. Also, there's something that I need to say, and it's prominent in my book. One of the reasons that Dick Schwartz, I reacted so powerfully to Dick's demo when I saw it in '95 was that I worked for many years very intensely with a process called A Course in Miracles. I don't know whether you've heard of it.
I have not, no.
Okay, well, it sounds way creepy, and when you talk about it, it really it feels crazy. But what happened was I was married to a woman for many years who was a seeker, and she was very interested in anomalies, things that science can't explain, like crop circles. After a year or two, that she had changed profoundly. Mm-hmm. And that she was much less angry and much less reactive and much more curious and open-hearted. And I said, what's going on with you? Because I was really interested in things that help people change. Like my book, talked about, my understanding of how AA worked. Because I didn't like AA. I found it unattractive. But, I saw it work. And so she said it came from A Course in Miracles. And A Course in Miracles is a series of, is 3 books and 2 pamphlets. And it was channeled to a couple of psychologists in New York. And I read that, anyway, if you describe it, it just seems like the craziest thing in the world. But it's the most profound system of thought I've ever been exposed to, and it explains why, no matter how good we are and how well thought of we are, and we all feel like if we were really seen and really understood as we are, we would be despised and rejected. Mm. And the Christians explain this with original sin. Mm. But when I talk, I say this. I say, does anybody here have have no idea what I'm talking about? nobody has ever raised their hand.
Right.
And and then I say, notice how grateful you are to me for reminding you of this, because say that's where I'm focused now, which is, after doing therapy for 50 years, what I realize is the most basic and important human need is to feel like a good person.
Mm.
And a good person, if you're being a good Nazi and being a good Quaker involves very different things, but Nazis need to be thought of as good Nazis, and they need to think of themselves as good Nazis, and Quakers the same. And the thing about thinking of yourself as a good person is complicated by the fact that we have parts that are vicious, deceitful, greedy, nasty, petty, all of that.
Yeah.
And we also, have parts that are much more self-led and are kind, and some of us kind, compassionate, well-meaning, and but if basically the parts of you that feel like you're bad don't get relief in a predominant, like and trauma histories produce that. Basically, you're living in unbearable pain, and then you find something that seems to relieve the pain, and you become dependent on it, and then you get into an addictive process.
Mm-hmm.
People are having trouble understanding why the head of Exxon is, pushing fossil fuels in spite of the fact that his intellect at some point has to understand he's creating an unlivable planet for his grandchildren.
Mm-hmm.
But he's addicted to being successful and making money.
Mm-hmm.
And, addictive process is a very good explanation for a lot of the stuff that is happening, and is, supported by the society. Greed is addiction.
Mm-hmm.
And the need, the idea that you can, control other people and make them do what you want is also addictive.
Mm-hmm.
Because doing that seems to relieve shame briefly.
Yep.
And so that, but we can't, we can't not give moral meaning to our experience.
Yep.
And self-energy has a superpower, and its superpower is it can remove moral meaning from experience.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what unburdening is.
Yeah.
Is what a burden is a moral meaning that a part has given its experience. And so the part thinks the way it's been treated by its parents means something about it. It can't help me, believing that, and it doesn't.
Yeah.
And unburdening to do that. So, and psychiatry, basically gets into battles with addiction or depression or anxiety or grandiosity or any, and tries to repress them.
Yeah.
And it can't.
Yeah.
But it turns out making friends with the parts that are forced into that role, and basically saying to them, we know you're trying to help. We know you're not bad, basically, because we form moral judgments not on what people do, but on why we think they did them.
Right. Right. You said something to the effect of, I think for a long time you believed that being a good therapist meant having strong technique, right? And then you did say you felt you were wrong with that assumption or that assertion. So what makes a good therapist now, in your opinion?
What makes a good therapist is being able to keep an open heart, noticing when your heart's closing,
Hmm.
and and noticing the parts of you that are making judgments and keeping those parts out of what you're doing. And then it's also, there's a talent. I mean, there's
Yeah.
one of the best, if not the best, one of the best therapists I've ever been in the presence of was a woman who never finished. I'm sure she didn't finish high school, and she was pregnant 20 something times, and just a hopeless drunk, and then became, a very effective ex-drunk. She was a spectacular connector. And, it's odd because I'm very socially inept. I'm socially awkward. But I'm comfortable, talking in front of 1,000 people. And I just have parts that are socially. I'm much better socially than I was. But and I have a talent for therapy, and and I can spot people who have a talent for therapy, and because I've been doing it a long time, I've been teaching it a long time, and so what makes a good therapist is the ability to keep an open heart, but also just the ability to connect with people in a useful way, and to be creative about thinking your way through the difficulties. And another thing that makes a good therapist is experience.
Hmm.
Is there aren't any prodigies in therapy,
Right. Right.
and you just have to do it a while until you you sort of realize what it is, and there's no way to tell somebody what it is. You know, uh, I just wrote a thing, a thing for a woman who wanted to be certified, and she, she's, a working class single mother, uh, and has a social, and she's a talent. When I wrote it, I said, on her thing, I said, she has the potential to be a trainer. She, when I had spotted her, and they're just, I've taken people on to mentor, because they have a conspicuous talent.
Hmm.
Uh, and the way I learned therapy, and the way I think everybody is watching good therapists do therapy. I learned IFS by watching Dick do IFS.
Hmm.
And then, I incorporated that the thought system, because IFS is not, a therapy technique. It's a way of understanding the mind.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So basically, I have dedicated my life to spreading IFS.
Hmm.
And, a guy started, I read in the paper that this guy who was an ex-con is starting, has started this recovery program. And I called him up and said, let me talk to your staff for a couple of hours. I'm not, I don't have the energy to train you, but I can introduce this to you and find you somebody to train you if you want to be trained in this.
Let's finish on one thing, and I think I would love for it to center around. Yeah, again, you just touch on the IFS. You touch on how your mission is to help spread the IFS model as much as you can. Yeah. So what are some things or common challenges or themes you see with up and coming IFS therapists or general therapists who are interested in IFS? And then what kind of things are you doing to help train and kind of prepare the next generation?
Well, what I'm doing is I run consultation groups,
Mm-hmm.
and you attended one. They're just
Yep.
groups of therapists, and they talk about their cases.
Yep.
And I use their cases as a platform for teaching about that kind of case. And the group you were at are mostly are quite experienced people, uh, and so what sometimes happens, of course, is what gets in the way always. When you get stuck, if you've got the basics and you're usually pretty competent, and all of a sudden you're stuck, it's because your part, basically you have a part that's reacting to a part of your client.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can't think clearly. And sometimes I can just give the person a perspective on that stops it from happening. But often people in groups will work with a part of them that's stopping them, and the group watches that. And it's a demo.
Yeah.
And then with advanced groups, and I think this has happened in the group you sat on. In an earlier iteration, the group you sat on grew out of training I did in Austin, Texas, where I trained my son. And there were two other people in the group that were in that training group too. And then some people dropped out and were replaced by, like, there's a woman from England, I think, in that group, and things like that. But that's the medium that I like best, is doing those groups. And the reason I'm doing this is to recruit people for those groups, because unfortunately, I put my groups in the hands of somebody who couldn't, had, a part of her interfered with her functioning well in that context. And she sort of, so I lost a lot of people. And I want to continue doing these groups. And the reason I'm starting demos, you sort of saw it developing from the group. They said, do demos.
Yeah.
Sounds like a good idea. So, I started thinking about it. And actually, I sort of know when I want to do it, which would be Monday afternoons and Friday mornings. Because it fits in with my schedule, and nobody wants to do anything Friday afternoon.
Yeah.
But I need to do one morning and one afternoon just because of time zones and shit, because I need a morning for anything in Europe and the East, and so, and I was thinking that, we would charge like $30 for people to attend. And no extended, things. They can attend as often as they want, and anybody at all can attend. If a short order cook wants to see what IFS. So it also can be a good introduction to people who are considering IFS therapy and want to know about it.
Yep.
And that could be a major market, as people want to, see what it is.